Hey y'all, it's Ashley Bookishram and I'm back with another video. So if you can hear the cicadas outside, enjoy the ASMR. I don't know if you can hear it because of the mic, but if you can, enjoy. They're nice to listen to at night. Anyway, so as you can see from the title of this video, we're here to talk a little bit about what it means to read diversely and whether it's a buzzword. So I've been thinking about this topic a little bit lately, and I'm not sure why or where it stemmed from, but I know that in all areas, those involved with literacy, book-related things, whether that's publishing, librarianship, the booktube community, there's been a lot of discussions about reading diversely. And I think that everybody kind of has their own perspectives of what it means to read diversely. So this is talking about me. This is my interpretation, and I'm going to talk about whether I think that I truly read diversely. And it's very interesting when I thought about whether I truly read diversely or not. So once again, as I always say with my discussion videos, it's okay if you do not agree with me or if you have different thoughts or opinions. That's the point of a discussion. It's not meant for everyone to agree upon the same things. It's to kind of share our thoughts and generate conversations. So getting to the first part of this, what does it mean to read diversely? So for me, I think that early on when I thought about reading diversely, it strictly was related to race, ethnicity, sexual identity, gender identity, religion. Those are probably like the heavy hitters for me. And I think for a lot of people, those still are the heavy hitters. But there are a couple of other elements that I think I started to think about, and mainly a conversation that's been happening here in the booktube community is this question of, or not even a question because it is true, how Western based our reading is in the booktube community and how we don't give as much shine to translated works or just works by international authors. And with just that one criteria, I don't think that I read 100% diversely because I don't really step into translated works as much as I should. I know that one of my goals this year was to read more translated works, and honestly, I have not been doing a good job of that. That's just me being completely transparent. The most translated stuff that I really have picked up this year has been a lot of manga, which is translated from Japanese, of course, but I want to go beyond that in actual like prose books and not a graphic work that's been translated. Actually, I think I read a couple of graphic novels that may have been translated as well. There's a company out in France that I really enjoy, and I read a couple of their translated works. However, as a whole, I don't think I do a good job of that. So I think that the elements that I talked about before are some elements, and there's more than that, but just kind of keeping it short. I think there's more elements that people kind of consider when they think about reading diversely. But I know that two major elements for me that I think get left out when we're talking about reading diversely is definitely including works that are written by non-Western authors, you know, whether that's originally written in English or whether that work is translated. And I also think that reading diversely means exploring multiple genres. And this is probably where it can get a little dicey, where people may disagree with me, but I think that opening up and broadening your horizons in terms of genre, and I'm not talking age categorization because adult, middle grade, children's, YA, those are age categorizations, not genres. But I think that reading sci-fi, fantasy, mystery, horror, contemporary, realistic fiction, literary fiction, I think that that should be included in what it means to read diversely. Now, in that arena, I probably do a little bit better than I do in translated works, but I think that it's truly important to have this conversation of what it means to read diversely, and that it doesn't always necessarily relate 100% to the demographic information about the author and the characters. I think when we start to hone in, and I'm guilty of this, so I don't want to have this conversation and come off as if I have not done this or I'm not currently doing this, but become more aware of the fact that just exclusively looking at those elements that I first mentioned, it kind of limits true diversity. And I wonder if that's something that people have really truly considered. So for me, although I think that I do come across as saying like, yeah, I definitely read diversely. I do in some aspects, and then in others I don't. So I can't sit here and say, oh yeah, I read 100% diversely, because that's not true. If I'm leaving out translated works, if I'm not exploring different genres, if I'm not exploring different formats, I think that I'm not truly reading diversely. I think the key thing about diversity is it's a variety, not sticking to what we traditionally know. But I know that because a lot of conversations have been happening about race and gender and sexual orientation, that those seem to be the categories that we focus very heavily on. And I know, speaking for myself, that is something that I've heavily focused in on. Before I shift the conversation over to the other side, I think my question to you is whether you think that you read diversely, or whether you feel like there are areas in which you can improve. Now, the next part of this is something that I think quite a few people have kind of discussed, but I haven't really jumped in the conversation yet, is that has reading diversely become a buzzword? Are we reading to really learn from people's experiences? Or are we doing this for checkpoints? And it can get kind of dicey in here, because I know, for example, I used to keep track of a lot of stuff that I was doing in terms of, what the author background was, like where they were from, whether the work was translated, and format, and all that type of stuff. I haven't done that in a while, because tracking that information is very, it takes a lot of time, and I we're not really working together right now. But I think that it can get kind of dicey when you start talking about your reasonings for reading diversely. Is it because you're broadening your horizons, or is it because diversity has now become a buzzword? And I'm not talking about like in the booktube community. There is a book that I wanted to read. I haven't read it yet, but I think it's one that I need to read in the next couple of months, and it's called Diversity Inc. And it talks about whether diversity now, especially in like corporate America or in businesses in general, they have implemented the need for diversity, and they use diversity as a keyword or as a buzzword for how they represent their company, but they're not really doing anything to change the structures of their businesses or corporations. And I don't want to say that it is the equivalent in the booktube community, because I can't speak for anyone but myself, but it makes me wonder if we've become so accustomed to using the word diversity that we feel like we have to read diversely in order to fit in the community. I think you should read diversely. I always think you should read diversely, but I think you should be reading diversely because you want to experience or learn about someone else's experience outside of your own, not to fill a checkbox, not to meet some requirement, not because you feel like it's a booktube standard, not because you feel like you're going to get called out. And sometimes I think that happens. I know that there's been a lot of discussions about readathons and how readathons now incorporate things like read a book by an author of color, and it's like, are we really going to use that as a way to help people read diversely, or should people be naturally reading diversely anyway, instead of it literally being a checkbox on a graphic image that people use for readathon? So that aspect of the conversation, I think, is definitely a little bit more complicated. It's a little bit more nuanced, but it's something that I kind of wanted to talk about with y'all in general, because I want to gauge how everyone is feeling about that. So like I said, there's this twofold aspect when we're talking about diversity. What does it mean to truly read diversely? Are we just talking about these categories that we check for? Does it go beyond that? Do you include translated works from authors that are not part of the Western world? Are we actually reading a wide variety of genres? Would you include that as part of diversity, or would you not? And then the second part of that is, what are we doing when we say that we're reading diversely? What is the motive behind reading diversely? I know there's been a couple of really, really great videos out there, which I wish I would have bookmarked them. If I do find them, I'll leave them down in the comment box below. But I know that a lot of people have made some really great videos about when you're reading diversely, what are you looking to gain out of reading a diverse book, and really using that time to self-reflect why you're doing it. I think that eventually with practice, and once again, here's a nuanced part of the conversation. I don't want to say that tracking is bad, because tracking is a way for people to hold themselves accountable. I think that eventually, when you start to become naturally accustomed to picking up books outside of your normal worldview, then you don't necessarily always have to track unless that's just your thing. I think that it becomes kind of sticky when we are creating check boxes, or we are mentally, maybe even without realizing it, or saying, like, okay, I read this book for this month, I read this book for this month, I read this book for this month. And that can go back to celebrating certain months. So like February, I'm going to use this as an example because it is a marginalized group that I'm a part of, being Black, February being Black History Month. And we have a tendency, I think a lot of Black booktubers and bookstagrammers and bloggers now put an emphasis on saying that while February is a month to celebrate Black literature and to really invest a lot of time and energy into reading Black authors, that is not the only month in which you should consume Black literature. And I think that too has, I don't want to say it's become an issue, but I think that is also a vital part of the conversation. Are you reading diversely because it's this month-long celebration of a certain marginalized group, and that's the only time that you're picking up these specific authors? Are you attempting to incorporate someone else's experience into your reading habits at all times? So, I've had to train myself to do that. I'm not going to sit here and say that, oh, I've been reading diversely my whole life. And there's a long story to that. There's a long story to the representation of Black characters, Black authors in literature, especially growing up in an American school system. I know that it's something that I've actively had to train my mind to do, to acknowledge the fact that my lived experience, even being a part of a marginalized group, because being a part of a marginalized group does not exempt you from reading about someone else's experience. And we can get into the whole conversation about the importance of intersectionality and, acknowledging people who are at the crossroads of multiple marginalizations. I think that it doesn't exempt you from reading about someone else's experiences. I think that this conversation, as with a lot of conversations that I have on this channel, they're very interesting. They call for a much more nuanced conversation, and conversations that do cause a lot of self-reflection. So when I have these discussions, I think a lot of it does come from my own self-reflection, where I can sit here and say, I've trained my brain to pick up books that are not within my own experience, and now it comes naturally. But I can also acknowledge that I still struggle, and I still am not good at picking up books from non-Western perspectives, which is extremely important. And I can't give the amount of significance of to that thought process, especially because I'm coming from a Western perspective. But I know that is an area that I struggle in. I know that for me, over the past couple of weeks and months, and even the greater part of last year, knowing that I do not do good in that area, which once again goes back to that statement of me saying I can't sit here and genuinely say I read 100% diversely. I don't. I think that really, truly thinking about diversity is an ever-growing process. You never reach a point where you've got it all down. You never reach a point where it's like, okay, I'm done. I know how to do this now. It is a constant evolution. I think you never stop growing and learning about other people's experiences and their livelihoods and whatever they're putting into their writing. I don't think that process ever stops. So can we ever say like, yeah, I read diversely? If I don't know. It's so complex because I don't think anybody ever, and I mean, this is what I believe to be true. I don't think anyone has perfectly read diversely. I think that a lot of people put in great effort. I think a lot of people do read diversely, but there's always an avenue of experience to explore. So, you know, this is not a long video per se, but I think I just kind of wanted to talk about that a little bit. And what does the booktube community really mean when they say they read diversely, and what are the motivations? And you don't have to share that if you don't want to. I think that that's something that can be done, you know, internally, and you can kind of decide whether you want to share that or not. But what are your motives? Are you doing it because you want to see other people's perspectives? You want to learn, you want to build empathy? Because empathy is a huge thing for me. I think that, especially looking at it from the lens of librarianship, which a lot of these things I do. I know that it's different, and I know that not everybody necessarily agrees, which is fine. But my experience is definitely, I don't want to say clouded, but it's heavily influenced by what I do for a living. I would be foolish to say that it's not. It's very hard to mentally separate what I do at work and what I do on here. Not saying that the two aren't separate in terms like I don't ever bring them together and talk specifically about my job, but I think that the way that I think about our community, the way that I think about our reading processes, it definitely comes from that lens of librarianship. And one of the big things that I think I advocate for and talk about a lot is that the importance of diversity to me is not a checkbox and looking good for this community. It's about empathy, which is why we get kids to read diversely at a young age. I've talked about it here quite a bit, where in librarianship we have this concept of windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors, which was done by or coined by Dr. Bishop. And the reason why that's important is because when you have those elements at play, when kids are able to see themselves, they're able to look out into the world, and when they're able to walk into other people's experiences, you're building empathy. And if there's anything that this world needs a lot more of, it definitely is empathy, which is what I think the core of diversity is empathy when it's all said and done. And you're probably saying, well, Ashley, how can you find empathy in different genres? Like, why would a genre be a means to find empathy or read diversely? Because I think the means in which the information is presented in different genres gives you a different taste of an experience. And I could be wrong in that analysis, but that's the way that I kind of feel about it. When I explore different genres, different forms, whether that's graphic, poetry, or prose, I think that experience is conveyed differently. If I'm reading books about the Black experience, for example, right, the viewpoint or the lens of the Black experience that I may get from a comic, I will not get that same lens from a regular prose book. It just, for me personally, they're not the same. I don't think that they're conveyed the same way. I don't think that the experiences are necessarily told the same way at all times. And it's not saying that they can't be talking about the same topics, but the way that it's presented is very different. The emotion is different. And I think that it builds empathy in different ways. But for me, I think diversity, the end goal for me, I'm not saying this for anybody else, is empathy. That way, when you are privy to this experience of someone else firsthand, you can acknowledge it and you can appreciate it, which is, I think, something that our community has been battling with. When certain communities go through certain things, there's silence on some ends, and people don't advocate in a way that that group feels supported. And part of me wonders if that is because there is a lack of empathy there, that lack of understanding, that incapability of putting yourself into someone's shoes. And I think that truly wanting to read diversely does help with that. And I know there's some people who are like, reading does not help build empathy. It does. It really does. If you watch kids, it's kind of harder, not saying that it can't happen with adults, but if you see that growth and that process in children, which I have in the amount of years that I've worked in a library, it makes a heck of a difference. When kids are presented with a wide variety of books, whether that's genre, format, the categorizations of the author or the characters, they see the world and themselves differently. They're able to appreciate someone else's experiences, and as a result, they have empathy. So this wasn't a video about why I read diversely, but I think that it is relatively important for me to include that. So with that being said, if you would like to, like I said, this may be a personal question for some of you who are watching, but if you feel comfortable sharing, let me know, what does reading diversely mean to you, and why do you read diversely? And do you feel like you could be doing better, or do you feel like, you're good to go? Do you feel like your mindset has changed on why you should be reading diversely, or do you feel like, I'm just reading to read? So as always, as I say in the comments, please keep it nice. No, people, keep it respectful. That's the better word. Keep it respectful. I think for the most part in all the videos that I've done here, that most people have kept conversations very, very respectful. It's been a lot of good dialogue that's happened, but I always, include that at the end just because. But as always, y'all, if you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more content from me, make sure you click the subscribe button, hit the bell for notifications. If you're looking for ways to support my channel, the links will be down in the description box below. Looking for ways to follow me on social media, those links will be down in the description box below. And I will be back with another video soon.